Gospel of the Lord.
I don't know about you, but I've been watching what's happened in the hurricane and the flood down south, and it's just devastating. Right? I spent some time in Augusta, Georgia, so to see some of the pictures and to see the pain really moved me to want to do something. And so I think as a church, next week we'll have a special collection box set up if those of you want to donate to some of the relief efforts that'll go through the church so that we know it's going directly to help the families. But there's something about that. And I think as Catholic Christians, there is an appreciation for the value of human life. And so when we see a need, we respond. You respond generously because you want to help alleviate pain and suffering. It's a beautiful thing. It is unique, though, in a sense of how we see the human person. This October, it's Respect Life Month. And Bishop has asked that we preach in the beginning of this month about the consistent ethic of life. I'll get into that in a minute. But every year, if you've been in this church, you know that we talk about some matter that's affecting the dignity of human life. And so we have a table out there in the Kennedy room with all sorts of different things. But the consistent ethic of life is described like this. Mark Shea wrote this article, and this way he describes it. The church proposes what is called a consistent ethic of life. It must, of course, do so because it is bound by sacred tradition to the proposition that all human beings, without any exception whatsoever, are made in the image and likeness of God, and that Jesus Christ died for all human beings without any exception whatsoever. Therefore, each human person, without any exception whatsoever, is sacred and is the only creature that God wills for its own sake. We had an excerpt from Genesis today about Adam and Eve, and about God saying that he didn't want Eve to be alone. If we go through the days of creation and we understand what God is doing, the crown of creation is humanity. And we are made in his image and likeness. There's no other ancient religions or ancient philosophies that actually have that understanding. There's something unique about the Judeo and then Christian understanding of the human person, the image and likeness of God. No matter who you are, what you do, you are made in the image and likeness of God. And you are also made to know him, to love him, to be in a relationship with him, but also with one another, that we are made for communion. So this is best expressed when we are doing our best in the church to live that out. Meaning the way we treat one another, the way we engage in public life. And sometimes in our culture now, you might hear that your religion should be a private affair. Well, I would say this. This is where Jesus teaches us about it. If you do something in private and then do something different in public, what do you call that? A hypocrite, right? And Jesus speaks about being hypocrites. Certainly the way we engage publicly is within our type of culture and the life, that we are today in a diverse society. But what God is asking of us is to be authentic in following him. Last week, we had a reading of the 72 disciples, right? Because you might think, well, listen, that's more your job, Father, than it is mine. Au contraire, brothers and sisters. 72 disciples. They were followers of Jesus. They were not the apostles. They were called by Jesus. They were sent out to preach the good news, right? To heal the sick, to cast out demons in his name. So you are called to be loved and in a relationship with him, but what is also uniquely Christian in this sense is we are then called to evangelize the world, to share the good news. I saw this back and forth on Twitter. I spend too much time on Twitter, or X as it's known, but I like to read the conversations. I'm curious to see when people engage in things. And in some places, they do respectfully, a lot of times not. But this idea of what someone of faith should live, how they should live, and how they should integrate into American society. And it was great because it did come down to the point, if you are authentically this, and your faith tells you that you should do that, and we want to support that person being authentic, even if we don't agree with it, don't you think then that it belongs? So it was a curious conversation. I'll tell you this, our first identity as beloved sons and daughters is to follow Jesus Christ, to listen to the words of Jesus Christ, to trust what the church tells us and asks of us. And the church says, listen, one of the best ways that we can have a positive effect on society is that we value every human life from the beginning of conception to natural death, in between. The people that don't like us, that we have to love them. And it's amazing we can see in human history where this worked out well. The first century, where Christians were martyred, where they loved even though they were being persecuted, where they proposed this way of living in Jesus Christ and not imposing on people. What happened? The church just exploded. When we entrust our whole life to living as Christ calls us to, He will produce beautiful and good fruits. And yet, because we're in a society where human life is not respected at different stages, we do need to preach, so to speak. And yes, we can do that with our lives. And yes, we have to do that with how we treat one another, even with those we disagree with. But sometimes we also have to use our words. If we look at the way in which families can have difficulties and challenges, that's the way I like to look at it. And years ago, Pope Francis came to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, and he presented with Cardinal O'Malley presented with a Christian pastor, Rick Warren. Rick he's a Protestant, but he appreciates that the church has this consistent ethic of life. And so in the context of family, he presented this kind of litany of things. You could tell he's a Protestant pastor because it's like by alliteration. But listen to the offenses against life that he kind of articulated. He said, today's society, materialism is idolized, immorality is glamorized, truth is minimized, sin is normalized, divorce is rationalized, abortion is legalized. In TV and movies, crime is legitimized, drug is minimized, comedy is vulgarized, and sex is trivialized. In movies, the Bible is fictionalized, churches are satirized, God is marginalized, and Christians are demonized. The elderly are dehumanized, the sick are euthanized, the poor are victimized, the mentally ill are ostracized, immigrants are stigmatized, and children are tranquilized. In families around the world, our manners are uncivilized, speech is vulgarized, faith is secularized, and everything is commercialized. That's a huge list of things. But it gets us kind of wrapping our minds around what it would mean to live a consistent ethic of life. When I was in seminary, I had a friend, he's from New Jersey. He's a priest down there in Trenton. And I'd say he's a little bit left of center. When I went into seminary, I was a little bit right of center, in the sense of your political views or whatnot. And I remember Al telling me, he's like, before the Iraq War, the invasion, he's like, I'm going down to protest. And I'm like, oh, all right, well, that's great, good for you. But I wouldn't necessarily have gone at that time. And so he goes down and he's protesting the war. And it was when he came back, he said it was fascinating because I'm out there protesting the war, and I got to know some people. They were so excited. Then they invited me to an abortion protest, for abortion rights. And he goes, and then I started to get to talk to them. He's like, I blew their mind that I would at the same time protest the war and go against abortion. Their minds were blown. They're like, what do you mean you're pro-life? And he's like, well, that's what the church teaches. That's the consistent ethic of life. It's the same guy who was protesting the death penalty and things. And this is the unique power that we have if we live the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is where we also need to take our political hats off, right? Jesus sees persons, not politics. And certainly we want authentic persons who are trying to live the Christian life to positively impact society. But we need to see persons. So even those people who don't like us because of what we stand for or how we live, we're called to love them, right? And not to play the victim card. Jesus never played the victim card, right? What did he do? He offered himself, right, as a spotless victim, but he never played the victim card. He willingly took it on. If we follow the example of Christ and we live rooted in truth and goodness and beauty, the gospel, we can have an amazing impact. So I'm not saying don't get involved, I'm saying yes, get involved. Make sure, though, at home that we're living that way as well. Rick Warren went on to say, he said, unfortunately, Christians, you and I often are disorganized and demoralized. Our faith is compartmentalized, and our witness is compromised. So what do we need? We need to revitalize our worship, minimize our differences, mobilize our members, and evangelize the lost, and we need to re-energize our families. Right? So I love it because what he says is we need to put God first in our life, and we need to worship him in spirit and truth with all of our being. have that ordered properly. Take care of what's at home. Support one another. And then preach that gospel, just like the 72 disciples did. So as you kind of head into the week and the month and you continue to see some of the things around the world that concern you, right, to bring that in prayer before the Father, and also to be aware of how am I living this out personally? Am I seeing people as if they are made in the image and likeness of God? Even people who may say something vile that I disagree with or that I know is inherently wrong, can I still see the image and likeness in that person? That's what the gospel preaches. That's what Jesus Christ reveals to us, and that's what the call is as Christians. Pope Francis said, "Love for the other cannot be reserved for exceptional moments, but must be constant in our lives. That is why we are called, for example, to safeguard the elderly like a precious treasure, and with love, even if they cause economic difficulties and inconveniences, but we must safeguard them. This is why we must give all the assistance possible to the sick, even in the final stages. This is why unborn children are always to be welcomed. This is why ultimately life is always to be protected and loved from conception to its natural end. And this is love."